Today we're going to work with the words darkness and hope. Darkness and hope. And we're moving into, well, we have moved into the Advent season, right? And we're going to create a sacred space the next few weeks with that time. And we're going to start today in some darkness. So for the next few weeks, I'll ask you to indulge me with a little bit difference in the way we normally do things this time of year. And we're going to have some extended practices and meditations and thoughts based around our own story and the formation that we have. So, you know, this time of year, you know, it's all bright lights and it's all pretty flowers and it's great, but we've come out of 3 years of just whatevers, right? And it's hard to switch to this is lovely and this is beautiful. So, and if we think about just the Christmas story itself, it's a birth story, right? And yes, birth is happy, but it's also lots of months of waiting and lots of months of darkness for that person that's being developed, right? And then that situation is also very, very messy before we get to that life and that light and that beauty. So this year, your invitation is to hold that intentionally as we move through this time of year in community. And we're actually going to start with, and I'll just give you a preview before we move into the rest of our daily word here. So this week, we're going to work with the darkness. And then next week, our bodies and how we relate to our own selves. And then how we relate to the silence in the third week. And then how we wait and how we take on that waiting in the fourth week. And then we have Christmas, right? Where it's the celebration of our own emergence from all of that work. So if you would just close your eyes and breathe with me with the words of hope and faith and darkness. Hope dawns within each of us and leads us to deepen our faith. And as this Advent season begins, we don't shy away from the dark. We don't shy away from hopeless notions that have crept into our thinking. We recognize that hope within our minds and our hearts. We say yes to goodness. We say yes to a sense of renewed hope. We say yes to a promise of our own growth into something wonderful. That birth that's on its way. We reaffirm our belief that no earthly condition, no worldly circumstance is greater than spirit. This is where we place our faith, in the power, in the presence, the love, and the grace of divine. We recognize these attributes within ourselves. We perceive them not only in ourselves, but in others. And together in this community, we have the power to create the world for the highest in hope and faith, even within the darkness. Romans 15. May the divine fill you with all the joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope and in power. Just take a couple of breaths with that. Take another breath and recognize that hope dawns within each of us and leads us to deepening our faith. Okay, so I'm going to ask, would somebody like kill the lights in the main hall for me today? All right, so I said at the very, very beginning, we're going to work with some darkness today. So I know it's daylight, but pretend that we turned the lights off, that we're going to, I'm sorry? It's a dark day, yeah, with all the rain. So this space for the next 4 weeks, like I said, is to recognize that Advent is about waiting, right? And waiting is not easy. It's filled with uncertainty, and sometimes it's filled with suffering, because in the waiting, we keep trying to project what's going to happen. And that's always what causes turmoil inside of us, is that projection into the future. You know, it's like, what's going to happen? And, you know, many of us, we're not so good at waiting. We live in a world that's pretty like on the spot. You know, we have everything right there. So I'd invite you to take on this dark as a place that's maybe more comfortable than what we're used to. So instead of moving quickly to turn on that light, you know, we're going to take the next 4 weeks to gradually get to that light. And in this chaotic, messy time that we often try to put glitter on and lights, you know, to let us feel when we are uncomfortable and not shy away from that. And what does that uncomfortableness tell us about really what's going on with us and what's going on around us? And what are we recognizing? What are we recognizing with our internal struggles? Our, you know, is it a financial thing? Is it because plans didn't come through? Is there some kind of illness involved? Is there some kind of relationship that's coming to the forefront because it's the season where we're trying to connect with everybody? And recognize that every piece of life, everywhere, is invited to the table this time of year, this Advent table. And know that, yes, we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the joy of birth and the joy of community. But we also want to embody and not shy away from being silent and waiting and coming out of that darkness. Like I said at the beginning, we've spent collectively as a society a couple of years just trudging through, you know, and how do we heal that? It's not a light switch. It's a gradual recognition. And so this is an invitation to share that with each other. Gabor Mate, he says, the attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain. So it's the idea of recognizing it, and even not in ourselves and maybe in the society, that when we actually look at what that darkness is or what's bothering us. Like, remember a few weeks ago when we talked about the gift of the shadow, you know, and we showed the picture of all the pieces being put together with all the gold, you know, and that's, we are not going to be able to put things together with all that gold and that loveliness and that love if we're not willing to look at it. So recognize that throughout time. I mean, this idea of like light all the time is kind of new, right? So when it got dark out, you were in the dark. You either went to sleep or you figured out how to burn some kind of candle or whatever. You know, this being in the light all the time is pretty new. So our ancestors knew how to rest and knew how to not be afraid in that dark. And to know that we can be safe in that place. And in the darkness, yeah, we can stumble, we can trip, we can get hurt a little bit. But really, the things we don't see, they're still there in the light, right? So to recognize that nothing is ever really hidden, that there's not evil in the dark, right? There's not evil in the society going through muck, but there's an invitation to a journey, an invitation to remind ourselves that we can have an interior individual experience with that. And that new life comes from that darkness. And think about at the very, very, like a new moon night, right? If we're on a new moon night and you look up at the stars, you can see much more of them, right? So without that extra light, you can actually see more light. You can see all of that shining through in the darkness. And think about this, dark was on the plane first, right? We often think of the creation story as let there be light, and yet light didn't come until after water, right? We had water and we had darkness and we had air before we had light in the creation story. You need all of that to build to recognize that that light is already there. You need that flowing of emotions. If we take that water as that flow of emotions, you need that. You need that to flow and to move and to face that fear. And in doing so, we make friends with it. So how many of you, when you first go to the water or the ocean or wherever, or the wave pool, right? You're like on the edge because the waves are coming at you and you don't want to go there. Or you ever see the little person that sees the waves for the first time? You know, it's like really scary. And then after a while, you can't get them out of it because they're jumping waves, because the scary turned into something not to be scary with and to ride and to just move with. And we're all invited to do the same thing. So in this darkened area today, I'm going to ask you to move through a special meditation with me. I'm going to play a song to get us into it, and I'm going to walk you through, and we're going to have a period of quiet for you to just be with the questions and that grace that flows in the darkness, and allow yourself to maybe ride the waves a little bit while we're here. And then Andrew's going to play for a couple of minutes to bring us out of it. So I know it's a little different than what we normally do, but it's an invitation to be with it. And then I'll talk about some things that you can do once you're home with this. So first, close your eyes if it feels comfortable. We're going to take a breath and pause and be still. And in that breath, we're going to focus on the present, on ourselves, and those that are experiencing today with us. Now, as a community, you're invited to stay in this silence, to recognize any brokenness that's within our own selves, our own bodies, our own life. You're invited to touch that anger or that hurt or brokenheartedness. Things that maybe we have buried, broke off, and put real deep. Finding the roots to that broken, to that hurt. To know these dark places are all right. They're part of our human journey. And in finding those, we ask ourselves, what does our heart show us as the way to wellness, individually and collectively? What parts of ourselves do we deny or reject or neglect that are in the dark? What parts of ourselves need to be reclaimed? How do we feel with this discomfort? How do we work with it? How do we ride the wave? What part of that dark are we afraid of? And what part do we recognize as beautiful? In which ways can we learn to not have to conquer the dark, but to be informed by it and informed in it? Inviting ourselves to use this Advent time to acknowledge any tension, any pain, any uncertainty, and reminding ourselves that grace flows in the dark, that we can ride the waves. We're going to spend just a couple of minutes in silence, allowing yourselves to sit with those ideas and those feelings. Take a nice breath in. Come back to the room. We can bring the house lights up again if you want. It's up to you guys. As you contemplate these things for the next week until we meet again, I invite you to practice a little at home. And you can take there's a couple different things you can do. You can take a piece of paper and just write words, symbols, images, whatever comes to you about what dark is for you. You know, what is that really? Kind of like a freestyle journaling or sketching. You could also take a candle, not an artificial light, but an actual candle. And you could mark it with little lines that show either days, you know, so, and then sit with that candle in a darkened room until it gets to that line that you've made for the day. And recognize, how do you recognize the light and the dark? What does that feel like? What does it feel like to be surrounded by darkness and know and see that the light is there, and just sit with that, you know? And you might find that it's hard not to get up and just switch on that light like right away, you know? But again, if you've ever stargazed, you know that the longer you stay out, the more that light you see, even on, you know, even on those nights where there is no moonlight and it's just a new moon. The longer you stay out, the more light it seems, even in that dark. So play with that. You're invited to play with that this week. You know, and you could even play with expanding the time with that, you know, each day, and see how that feels. And then you'll be invited, if you want, no one's going to be forced to share those experiences during our light shining moment next week that you've had with your own light and your own practice in the next week.